Hello, all, and welcome. We are so excited to host you today for an interactive conversation with Noble post secondary experts about college access and options during the past year's pandemic. I am thrilled to join you for this conversation. My name is Dominique Battle, and I have the privilege to serve as Portfolio Director at A Better Chicago, a philanthropy fighting poverty with opportunity by investing in and supporting ideas, programs, and leadership of high potential organizations. Thank you for joining us, and please interact with us on social media at Be Noble Schools on all platforms, and for A Better Chicago on Twitter at _ A Better Chicago, IG and Facebook simply at A Better Chicago during and after this presentation. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Aidé Acosta and JY Sun, who will lead today's conversation and answer your questions. Dr. Acosta is the Chief College Officer for Noble Schools. As Chief College Officer, she leads all college access and success strategies, including overseeing Summer of a Lifetime, college counseling, alumni supports, alumni career office, Pritzker Access Scholarship, also known as PAS, and Noble Forward. Dr. Acosta also serves as a leader in the national education community, collaborating with a national network of practitioners and sharing Noble's practices toward improving college outcomes for underserved populations. Dr. Acosta has served at Noble since 2013, and in 2015 launched the Pritzker Access Scholarship program to support undocumented students. Dr. Acosta earned her BA from the University of California, Riverside, and a master's and doctorate from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. JY Sun is the manager of college analytics and insights at the Noble Network of Charter Schools, building analytic systems around Noble's college data to achieve Noble's vision of 75% college completion. Prior to joining Noble, JY was a data scientist at the Chicago-based personalized learning startup Leap Innovations. They began their career in education as a high school teacher on the Big Island in Hawaii, where they were a national finalist for the 2016 Sue Lehman Teaching and Learning Fellowship. JY has degrees in economics, international relations from the University of Delaware, and a master's in computational social science from the University of Chicago. I'm so thrilled for you to hear from these experts today and want to remind you that you can submit questions at any time through the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. If you're joining us via Facebook Live, you can comment on the post and a member of our team will ask the question in Zoom for you. Without further ado, Dr. Acosta.
Thank you, Dominique. Oops, let me make sure. Okay, good. Thank you, Dominique, for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to have you join us today and hear about the work we are leading at Noble. Noble, most of you are familiar with Noble, but just to make sure, Noble was founded in 1999 and has grown into the highest performing network of open enrollment public schools in Chicago, with 18 schools, that is 17 high schools and 1 middle school, serving families from all 77 Chicago neighborhoods. So who does Noble serve? We currently have 12,700 students, including 2,800 seniors preparing to graduate this year. Our biggest stakeholder group are our alumni at 17,500. We're really excited that upon the completion of this year, we're going to reach past 20,000. We serve 98% of our students are Black or Latinx. 87% of our students are on free or reduced lunch, and 84% are first generation college students. Let me ground us first in our vision. We have a very bold vision at Noble, and that is to ensure that all students have equitable and positive school experiences that equip them to succeed on the path of their choice. leading to 75% of alumni completing college. That is our vision, and we are moved and excited by it each day. We also have to acknowledge the complete disruption of COVID this past year and how we responded. So similar to other educational organizations, we had to pivot and create a new approach in this remote world, and particularly through remote learning. And at the onset of COVID-19, we took a holistic approach by the following. We've distributed over 782,000 meals through our campuses, have raised and distributed more than $700,000 to 600 Noble families through the Noble Support Family Fund, as well as almost 100,000 through the Noble Staff Relief Fund to help support our staff. We've distributed more than 12,000 Chromebooks and 4,000 hotspots to Noble students. And our support, continues throughout the campuses. We provided a $500 work from home stipend, for example, at the onset of the pandemic. And this year, we provided free COVID rapid tests to nearly 5,000 Chicagoans at our campuses, and have provided our staff with at least one opportunity to receive the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. In our current reality, the stakes are high. The aspirations of students and families are also high, and we continue to honor them. In the midst of a global pandemic and the reckoning of racial injustice in this country, our collective work at Noble is to end the cycle of systemic racism within educational spaces and empower our students and graduates with the tools to dismantle racism and injustices. A college degree is a pathway to enter systems of power and create positive multi-generational change. Our work is grounded in our families' aspirations, what our parents tell us, why they've chosen Noble as the school for their child or their children. In a recent community survey, our parents overwhelmingly indicated that they chose Noble for the prospect of college for their children. In fact, 98% of our parents identified college as the most important priority or a top priority. In this illustration, you see what encompasses our vision for college. As we strive to dismantle racism and injustices, we are tasked to ensure that each of the students have a pathway of choices should they choose to go to college, and ensure that our students and their families have the necessary resources and information to make an informed decision that best suits their goals and aspirations. This illustration captures our collective vision of college access and outcomes at Noble. A college degree creates a pathway towards social mobility and fulfilling careers, right? And this is generally the vision that's created around college is about mobility, but we see it more than that. Nonetheless, it does create an opportunity for increased wages, for benefits, access to better healthcare, and it is currently tied to stable employment. In turn, studies have shown that life expectancy is also increased through educational attainment. Collectively, these gains provide an opportunity to also create intergenerational wealth for communities of color. The ability not only to save, but to invest money and build wealth from increased earnings. Generally, people who go to college earn more. Thus, they have the funds to invest in retirement plans or 529 plans and help pay for their own children's college education. Educational attainment is also linked to voting patterns. And subsequently, the ability to shape democracy through voting and civic engagement. Increased civic engagement is key for communities to advocate for better policies for themselves and thus towards economic and racial justice. This vision for college access and success is not just about individual gains, but grounded in the potential of creating positive multi-generational change. To give you one in-depth example, let's examine the impact of COVID-19 in employment trends. In this slide that was shared last year, was out data that was released last year, what it indicates is how completing a bachelor's degree is more urgent than ever. In our current reality, it is not just more likely to help you live a more economically and successful life, but just to live, to literally increase the probability of surviving the pandemic. In April 2020, the unemployment rate was the lowest among workers with a bachelor's degree or higher education at 8.4%, in comparison to the broader unemployment rate at almost 15%. This tells us that a bachelor's degree is a predictor for financial health during times of crisis. Relatedly, the ability to work from home, like most of us here today, is also correlated to degree attainment. A college degree can lead to health, mobility, fulfilling lives, but access and college completion is not equitable. This is why our aspiration at Noble that 75% of alumni complete degrees is audacious, it is bold. What you see in this next, I want to illustrate this by looking at who gets college degrees in the United States and in Chicago. So we know the importance of a college degree from what I just shared. Let's ground this work. Who actually earns degrees, right? Who earns degrees is intimately connected to the socioeconomic status. In fact, it impacts every milestone of the educational pipeline. While the top, if you see on this chart that while the top income quartile in this country earn degrees at a rate of about 60%, the lowest income quartile in the US earns bachelors at a rate of 13%. And in Chicago, 19% of ninth graders will eventually earn a bachelor's degree. We can collectively change these disparities and aspire towards creating positive multi-generational change. This is the work, the intervention we are choosing to make. I'm going to pass it on now, the next section, to my colleague, J.Y. Sun, to walk us through some of the most recent college outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you, Aidé. So with that grounding in context of college as a primary desire for our parents and families and a more clear understanding of what exactly a college degree means in Chicago and in the US, we're going to dig into and share what happened with our class of 2020. So first, a timeline and some terminology. If you think of a college journey, for most students, it takes somewhere between 8 and 12 semesters to complete school. So we'll refer to this timeline that you see here because there are certain checkpoints along the way that are really helpful for us to assess how we're doing. So first, we'll be focusing on matriculation, which is how many students decide to attend college immediately after high school graduation. For some historical context, between 2015 and 2019, Noble averaged 75% matriculation to 4-year colleges and 10% matriculation to 2-year colleges. This makes for a total of 85% of our graduating classes since 2015 matriculating immediately to college. So for the class of 2020, what we saw was that 80% of the class immediately matriculated to college. Now, what you can see on the table is that this is a 4% decline from the prior year, but to put that in context with what we saw across Chicago and the nation during the pandemic, 57% of public school graduates in the city of Chicago matriculated directly to college in 2020, according to the To and Through Project in a report they released last month. And 47% of graduates from predominantly low-income high schools across the United States matriculated directly to college, according to a report from the National Student Clearinghouse released in March 2021. And so this context is important when we're looking at the 4-point decline in Noble's matriculation between 2019 and 2020, because across the country and in Chicago, there were also declines in immediate matriculation to college by roughly 5 percentage points. So on this slide, we're going to be looking at the matriculation rates to just 4-year colleges, and we're going to break it down by race, ethnicity, and gender. And for each group that we're going to be pulling up, you'll see the number of graduating students listed for the class of 2020. So here you can see for our AAPI students, a relatively small number of our graduates at Noble. You can see the matriculation rates for 2020 in the middle column relative to where they were for 2019. As you can also see, the vast majority of the students that we serve at Noble that Aidé mentioned are Black and Latinx. And overall, if we also bring in the rest of this table here, relative to our class of 2019, matriculation to four-year colleges declined slightly by 1.8% from what you can see at the bottom of the table. This means that most of our 4-point matriculation decline, as noted in the previous slide, was due to fewer students choosing two-year colleges during the pandemic. And that being said, we saw rates, and what you can see on the table, of immediate college enrollment to four-year colleges remain steady for our Black female and Latinx female graduates. At the same time, we saw immediate four-year enrollment for Black and Latinx male graduates drop by about 5 points each. And this trend at Noble is parallel to what we know to be true at the national level for Black and brown boys matriculating to college at Noble at lower levels. And just to speak to the work that we've been doing to address this disparity at Noble, Dr. Janine Franklin has been leading the Black Scholar Experience Working Group to examine root causes and trends in our outcomes for Black boys. And among the many findings from the group was that Black boys at Noble had the lowest GPAs as well as the lowest representation in honors and AP courses. Both of these factors, but high school GPA especially, heavily factor into college access. There's a direct link between high school GPA and the number of applications submitted, acceptances offered, and therefore college matriculations, and down the road, college graduation. And so earlier this year, the working group released a report and recommendation that highlight the steps that Noble is taking to directly address these inequities. Now, placing our matriculation numbers next to public school graduates in the city of Chicago, again, this is matriculation just to four-year colleges. As we're looking at the numbers for AAPI students, the numbers you are seeing for CPS are again sourced from the To and Through project. The CPS numbers, it's important to note that they are inclusive of selective enrollment schools. They are also inclusive of Noble. They are all public schools in the city of Chicago. And then per the previous table, while we did see a 5-point decrease in immediate matriculation from our Black and Latinx male graduates, in context with the rest of the city of Chicago, we see Black males at Noble matriculating at 23 points higher, Latinx males matriculating at 34 points higher. We're also seeing our Black female students matriculating at 29 points higher, as well as our Latinx females matriculating at a rate that is nearly 40 points higher overall than the city of Chicago. And so you can see overall, relative to CPS as a whole, Noble's matriculation to four-year colleges stood at 70% relative to 40% of all public school graduates in the city of Chicago, which is a 30-point difference. So now we're going to look at where the class of 2020 enrolled in college. So on the first slide in this section, these are our top 10 four-year colleges by enrollment for the class of 2020. So what you can see is that UIUC, UIC, and National Louis continue to be the top 3 schools that Noble students are choosing after finishing at Noble, and that has been the trend, at least for the past several years. And overall, for the class of 2020, they enrolled in over 200 different colleges and universities. Another question we asked ourselves was, how far are our students attending college from home? So we looked at the median distance from Chicago for our students' college choices. And from what you can see here, the evident thing is that Noble's Black graduates are choosing schools that are much further away from Chicago than their peers. So at the top of each bar, you can see the median distance as well as the number of students in the class of 2020 at the top. And in fact, when we looked back at the last 5 years of data, we saw that, what we're seeing here for 2020 in terms of distance trend has not significantly changed from what we see in the past, despite the pandemic. We also asked ourselves if these enrollments or matriculation, using those terms interchangeably, were a shift from the prior year before the pandemic. And so taking a look at changes in matriculation from the prior year, this table is going to show the differences in enrollment between our 2019s and 2020s, specifically to four-year colleges. And so while I previously mentioned UIC, UIUC, and National Louis being the top three schools that Noble students are choosing after finishing at Noble, there were three other schools in particular that saw more than a 90% increase in matriculation in our class of 2020. And so those are circled on the table from what you can see. In particular, we've seen, financial aid packages from Columbia College here in Chicago improve dramatically. Additionally, we know that for Western Illinois, there was a combination of both financial aid improving, as well as the fact that the university remained open for in-person learning during the pandemic. And then historically, not only have our students done really well at Dominican, but it's also a closer to home school option for many students during the pandemic, which may explain the increase in students choosing those schools. And from what we can also see, there were modest increases at schools that we've historically sent a lot of students to, UIUC and National Louis. And then at the bottom of the table, just to highlight, we've seen the University of Michigan reduce the amount of aid that our students have received over the past several years, which is why our numbers of students going there have decreased. And the last thing to note is that these top three schools in which we saw a lot of students, more students this year going, were also schools that CPS students increased their matriculation to during the pandemic as well. Now, looking at matriculation changes for two-year colleges, what we can see here is that there were a couple of city colleges of Chicago, specifically the Richard J. Daley College, as well as Harold Washington, but decreases in enrollment at many of our other two-year colleges where we've historically sent quite a few of our students. But for context, this is a trend that we observe both with CPS as well as at the national level. CPS saw a 3.6 point decline in two-year enrollment, and nationally there were larger drops in enrollment to two-year colleges than four-year colleges during the pandemic. So, to sum that all up for matriculation, what we saw was that we maintained an 80% matriculation to college rate. That's 70% to four-year, 10% to two-year. And we credit this to the fact that by March 2020, Noble already had the supports and systems in place for students to make those informed college choices. And to the second point, while this was slightly down from the prior year, we know that this is rooted in broader national and citywide trends. And despite the pandemic declines, our matriculation continued to exceed that of comparable schools by at least 30 percentage points. And we continue to push for college because, as Aidé had mentioned already, that is what the communities that we serve aspire to for our scholars. So that covers the class of 2020 who were just starting their college journeys. But what about Noble alumni who were already enrolled in college during the pandemic? So we're going to take a look at the class of 2018 who were finishing their second year in college at the start of the pandemic, and the class of 2019 who were finishing their first year in college at the start of the pandemic. Coming back to this timeline visualization shown earlier, we've been focused on college matriculation, which happens immediately after high school graduation. But now we're going to take a look at college persistence. And college persistence is defined as students who return to any college from one semester to the next. And in particular, as you can see on the next two slides, we're going to pay most attention to persistence at the third semester, which is returning to sophomore year of college, and persistence at the fifth semester, which is returning to junior year of college. So first, we're going to look at the percentage of students in the class of 2019 who were enrolled in college in spring 2020 of their freshman year, who returned fall 2020 of their sophomore year. And we're going to be looking at spring to fall persistence to determine any differences resulting from the pandemic. And so we're going to be looking at three classes to see how Noble's class of 2019 performed relative to the prior two classes. And so what you can see is that in 2017 and 2018, Noble saw 78 and 79 persistence between spring and fall. But for the class of 2019, we did observe an increase in persistence spring to fall to 83%. Taking a look at how that compares and stacks against what public school graduates from Chicago, how they did. Spring to fall persistence for CPS students overall in college was 84%. But I think it's, as we just covered, important to remember that while our persistence rates are comparable, a much higher proportion of Noble students in 2020 and historically are starting college immediately. And of course, the CPS numbers are inclusive of selective enrollment schools and schools that are not necessarily demographically similar to Noble. Noble's also wrapped into those CPS numbers as well. And so what does this 4-point increase in persistence mean for individual students? Well, it translates to 40 additional Noble students still enrolled in college compared to if our persistence rate had not changed. Disaggregating this down by race, ethnicity, and gender, here we are looking at the class of 2019 again. This is students who were enrolled in their first year of college in spring 2020 who returned in the fall of 2020. So we're going to be looking just at the 4 largest subgroups of students that Noble has. And again, this is spring to fall persistence across Noble's 4 largest demographic groups. And then for CPS, the spring to fall persistence across those same 4 groups shown here. And so again, while, our spring to fall persistence is roughly in line with how CPS graduates on the whole are performing, it is important to remember that our matriculation numbers are 30 points higher relative to CPS as a whole. All right. Here, we're looking at 4-year colleges where we've seen high rates of return during the pandemic. So highlighting those bright spots. So you can see in this table, UW-Madison, UMichigan, and Fisk all had at least 93% of Noble students who initially enrolled coming back to the 3rd semester. Again, this is the class of 2019. UIUC, Columbia College in Chicago, and Central Michigan all had at least 81% of students returning to the 3rd semester. And these are out of the schools where we sent at least 15 students for that class. Now, hopping ahead to looking at the 5th semester persistence, these are rates of persistence through the beginning of junior year of college. And the most recent year for which there is data is obviously the class of 2018. This class was entering their 5th semester of college in the fall of 2020. So we're going to be looking at where they were in relation to prior classes. And in the fall of 2020, we had about 60% of our class of 2020 still enrolled in a 4-year college. The latest year for which we have CPS numbers to compare, they were at 63%, right? And again, we know that this is all inclusive of all public schools in the city of Chicago. And while we know that we have a lot more work to do in terms of pushing up our persistence numbers, the increase we're seeing since the class of 2016 is the result of intentional shifts we've made with our alumni counseling practices. And these shifts in practice, starting with the class of 2017, are really now showing in our data. And so that being said, our 5th semester persistence for the 2018s during the pandemic is 3 points higher than the class of 2017 and 6 points higher than the class of 2016. And so we wanted to illustrate what the impact of high matriculation rates means, as well as our improving persistence rates. So based on the rates and numbers that you've just seen, for every 100 Noble students who immediately enroll in a 4-year college, 55 CPS students immediately enroll. This is the difference, right, from our average 75% 4-year college matriculation rate relative to 41% CPS average. So this means that at the 5th semester, 60 Noble students will still be enrolled in college and 35 CPS students will still be enrolled in college. And this is based on, right, those roughly 60% persistence rates comparable that I just covered. And so this means at the start of junior year of college, the difference is that there are 25 additional Noble students still enrolled in a 4-year degree program. And we know that this translates to a higher rate of students earning bachelor's degrees further on down the road. So wrapping up the persistence trends that we observed during the pandemic, we saw, again, spring to fall persistence rise by 4 percentage points over the prior class. We know that our returning juniors to college, the class of 2018, returned to college at a rate 6 points higher than the class of 2016. And we also know that despite our persistence numbers remaining comparable, and they have improved, we are matriculating students to college at far higher rates than the rest of the city at about 30 points higher. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Aidé to give us some updates on our current class, the class of 2021.
Thank you, JY, for that comprehensive review of our outcomes in matriculation and persistence. This is a very exciting time for us at Noble and for anybody, working with high school students as they're starting to make decisions on their next steps post graduation. So recently, as of May 12th, we have had over 26,000 college applications submitted by our seniors, and what has resulted in 12,200 college acceptances, including to Ivy Leagues such as Brown, Cornell, selective universities, the University of Chicago, Stanford, and several HBCUs, including Spelman, Morehouse, and Tuskegee. So a really exciting time in terms of the wide range of opportunities that our students will have as they move on to the next steps past graduation. In addition, we've had several awards to very prestigious scholarships, including Posse with 9 winners, students heading to Madison, DePauw, Agnes Scott, for example, 5 Questbridge scholarship winners heading to Pomona, Wash U, and Notre Dame, as well as 34 of our Dreamers that have earned scholarships via the Dream.us scholarship, as well as competitive offers to Notre Dame and Colorado College, for example. So a really exciting time. And just to give you an overview of what happens next, we don't just get them to the step, but as you've heard in the deck that JY walked us through, we support our students through college and careers. So in the first step, here is where we are, our college counseling team, right? It doesn't just happen in the senior year. It's a lot of work that happens since the beginning, since the freshman year of each of our students. But specifically our college counseling team works with students and families on pre-college planning to apply and enroll in college and seek out additional scholarship and financial aid as they prepare to transition to college. And upon graduation and in through the summer, our alumni counseling team steps in to support our graduates to achieve their academic goals by coaching through matriculation, FAFSA, and also provide spot grants for unexpected expenses, all with a special focus on the first 3 semesters. And upon, we work cohesively then to supporting students through their next steps, through their careers. Our alumni career supports prepare our graduates for careers by coaching through internship opportunities, through job placement, as well as developing a strong professional portfolio with a specific focus on the last 2 semesters of college. So to wrap up, I want to share a few of the key takeaways you heard from us today. All in all, despite the global pandemic that upended national college access, 80% of Noble graduates enrolled in college immediately after graduation. There are greater numbers of Noble alumni persisting in college, leading to more alumni with college degrees. And finally, this work is possible because of deep partnerships with incredible students, their families, excellent teachers, comprehensive college counseling, and relentless alumni support. We are so excited for the next steps of our class of 2021 and to continue to support our students currently in college and those just graduating from college and taking on the next steps. With that, I'm going to pass it back on to Domonique and open it up for our Q&A section.
All right. Thank you so much, JY and Aidé, for such fascinating information. I'm so excited to dig into these questions that have already been coming in for us. As a reminder, if you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box so we can ask them. And I'll get us started with the question. So I know we just heard a lot of data and numbers. We also know that this work is really tough. It's challenging and it's human work, most importantly. Can you tell us about a student this year whose experience you think really captures the year that Noble students have had?
Yeah, I love to do that. That's the best part. I love, the individual stories and what is the impact, right? We can talk about the theory, we can talk about the numbers, but nonetheless, it's individual lives. I want to share the specific story of one of our dreamers, Kevin, who is heading to Notre Dame. And I should also say it's the first dreamer that had actually got a full ride to Notre Dame. So a really exciting time. But his family was impacted by the pandemic, and his financial circumstances had led him to decide that he was going to only apply to city colleges as his next step. And we have an amazing college team, and of course, Ms. Villegas, somebody who has been at Noble for a long time, a big advocate for our dreamers, convinced him to apply, to Notre Dame and to others. And I think about that life-changing moment, that small action that now has created this pathway of a change, of an opportunity, of a life-changing, opportunity of a lifetime, specifically for Kevin as he graduates from Noble. So again, elevating the story of the student and also elevating the amazing work that our college counselors do on an everyday basis. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Aidé. There's a question around whether or not the reason that Black students are going away much further than their counterparts. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I would say it's a combination of multiple factors. One is particularly in the last couple of years with the increased decisions of our students going away to HBCUs, that is a farther distance. So I think it's a combination of that desire of schools that are further away, HBCUs specifically. But I would also point at there are some cultural differences. That's not to make any close statement about either community, but I would say that for the Latinx community, there's higher apprehension from wanting to go away. And that's happened, especially with the college counseling guidings, trying to work with the student, with the families, and as they're making decisions and why it's okay to go away, and still respecting, of course, when those decisions are made. But I would say that there's also a cultural variation in the apprehension of where a young person is going to college. It's a great question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and resonates for me. Another question. So when you all talked about the data, you spoke to the fact that CPS data includes Noble students, excuse me, and that it also includes selective enrollment schools. Has the Noble team done any work dissecting the data where you compared Noble students' outcomes against students in more affluent suburban school districts?
Well, that's a great question. JY, I'll pass it on to you what your thoughts are. I would say that comparing our students specifically to other suburban schools, I don't think we've done the comparison, particularly because it feels like it's not an apples to apples necessarily, but that's a great question and something we would love to dig into. JY, anything you would want to add there?
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much more. We haven't done a juxtaposition to see like how we stack up against more affluent suburban districts, because most of the time we are focused on how are we performing relative to schools in the city of Chicago, and then when we can, making comparisons to comparable schools in Chicago as well. But I think it definitely is an interesting question.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I figured as much, but I wanted to get that question out there because it is a great question. And what you said around, apples to apples, I think, Dr. Acosta, is so important, because it's tempting to say, okay, how do we stack up? But when you want to ground in who it is that you're serving and what the outcomes are for those that you're serving, centering here in the city, makes a lot of sense to me. We're getting a lot of great questions, so let me see here. Eventually, I want to move to alum. So there was a question about that, but since we're digging in about the data, we just mentioned Black students. Here's another one. The question is, why is there such a significant percent of Black students not going to college? And if you are familiar with what the barriers are that those students are facing?
Yeah, I would say there's a combination of things. I think one of them that JY referenced, right, is really in thinking about like every piece of the pipeline, right? And what our team did, again, headed by Dr. Janine Franklin at Noble, is indicate like how the disparities that were existing in every different milestone, right? And specifically focusing on GPAs and access to dual enrollment, AP courses, and then how that is translating to college access, the type of applications that students are submitting, the type of schools that they're applying to, and then where they are deciding to go. That's on the one piece, and why we're so invested in shifting that, right? But it's not a college counseling necessarily unique approach. It is one, trends that are related to broader the city of Chicago, the nation, but nonetheless, something that we're trying to tackle as a school, right? As a school district, where, as a way to drive equity. The other piece that I would say that something I've struggled with as well is the disparities in the retention. One is, yes, the schools that students have an option to, but what I would really love to see is strengthen partnerships with our higher education institutions so that the onus is not only put on the student, but rather a collective approach that is like, okay, we're doing our part at the secondary level. We see there's these disparities. We're working towards it. We need the higher ed institutions to also be thinking about what are those disparities and how they are being resolved. And I don't want to say all, because there's some amazing approaches that our school, several of our partners are taking. I think about Dominican University, which is one of the most recent schools that reached out to us, who's leading an initiative to increase college access for Black students specifically. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I said thank you for that, Dominique.
The thing I would highlight also is I believe one of you mentioned the work going on with the Black Scholar group. So, you are taking the steps to really dig into the data and figure out what's going on. So while we may not have all the answers right now, that group has definitely gotten off to a great start. So there's a question which I think could be beneficial to a lot of folks. There's a question around, how you track student data after graduation, and if there are any recommendations you have for other charter management orgs or other folks out there trying to figure out their data process for tracking, and specifically a question around the data that you track versus getting large data sets like from NSC. So if you could speak to sort of what you do and how you keep all this together, because they mentioned how impressive it is. So if you could just speak to it, I think that'd be great.
Sure. So I'll get us started and then pass it on to JY to dig into all the details, especially in comparing what we have internally to our big data sets from NSC. I would first say, we are a data-driven organization. So we track, everything. And as an anthropologist, somebody, who enjoys research, I mean, it's, I just enjoy it very much. The main data system that we use is Salesforce for our alums. And then we start off with doing a senior survey that JY can speak a little bit more. They're working on it as we speak. When the student is graduating, to help us do some predictive analytics as well. I can get into that. Whoever had the question, I'll put down my email, or you can reach out and we can talk more. But it helps us also how we're focusing then on our alumni supports, right? In terms of having that data, having an understanding where students are going and the level of supports that they are going to need. So I'm going to say just the big pieces, right? The big buckets, it's primarily done. All our tracking is through Salesforce, but we need the staff to be able to do that, right? It's our alumni counseling team, our alumni success coaches that are ensuring that all that data is adequately recorded. So JY, if you can speak more to all the different processes that we use to actually, generate the data that we have.
Yeah, so to, I think, address specifically what's listed in the question, we do receive several times a year, like those really large data sets from the National Student Clearinghouse that give us, student by student, every single one of our graduates in the past, where they currently are, if they are enrolled in college or if they're not. So that is, official data, so to speak. That being said, as Aidé mentioned, we have many alumni counselors who do a lot of really important and really difficult work, and making sure that we are following up with every single one of our graduates as well. So we combine what our alumni success coaches and our alumni counselors are reporting out when they're doing outreach to our students, and then we confirm with the National Student Clearinghouse data that kind of gives us a more complete snapshot of where our students are. I'll also speak to the senior survey that Aidé talked about. The senior survey is, where we get a lot of information in terms of what students might plan to major on, at least initially when they go to college, and what they think they want to study. We also collect a lot of information there around that help us build important internal metrics for how we predict retention, persistence, as well as some of our graduation rates. And that goes into helping our alumni counselors, ensuring that they are following up and providing supports to students who need it the most once they go to college.
Thank you.
Dominique, can I just add also in terms of the alumni, on the alumni end, what we started doing a few years ago with our alumni career office is also track the career outcomes of our of college graduates specifically. So while our alumni counselors are tracking and recording, is a student still in college, right? Is this NSC data still is correct? And we're verifying all those different pieces. By the time a student is in the senior year, our alumni career office is then following up with students and supporting them and guiding them through the careers. And we're tracking, what are the outcomes of those graduates in terms of employment? Are they going to graduate school? What is the salary range? So we started doing this a couple of years back. We really hope to expand that to really enrich the kind of data that we have for our alums.
Thank you for speaking to that. As far as the alums go, I want to give the folks that are interested sort of an idea of scope or scale when you talk about this, because we just heard you talk through like all of the things that happen, all of the different Noble staff members that play a part in not only receiving the data, but scrubbing the data. So can you give us an idea, ballpark number of students, and then like ballpark staff that then work on these initiatives? Because they ask, like, we want to do this too. And it's great to hear how someone does it, but to understand what's the machine behind the work, I think is pretty important.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'm not going to get all the numbers right, but I'm going to do ballpark, even though I should. So each of our high schools has 1 to 2 alumni counselors, in addition, right, to a robust college team that's supporting through the college pre-college college access pieces. But the alumni supports team is we have about 24, I would say, alumni counselors across our 17 high schools that then are working, with their students. There is, and because it is still 1 staff member, maybe 2, for a school like, the for example, Noble Street, right, that has been graduating our original campus that has several alumni out. There's still one alumni, there's one alumni counselor to support all those students, but that's why we shifted the approach in 2017 to focus on retention, like focus on those first 3 semesters, not lose, like that focus doesn't mean we don't care about it, what's happening in the pipeline, but rather there's an intentionality there. So we do have a very robust program of support, and then the centralized support. So I overlook our alumni supports team that also has 6 alumni success coaches. 3 of them serve specifically 2 of our campuses, the Noble Academy and ITW Spear. So when they graduated their first seniors in 2018, we wanted to pilot a centralized approach to supporting alums, to consider, what model worked the best for alums. So we're still in the process of that. And then we have an additional 3 alumni success coaches that was part of an equity investment. So we centralized these 3 coaches to focus on the campuses that had the lower outcomes when it came to persistence, retention, and persistence. So they have their own campus-based alumni counselor, and they have 3 additional alumni success coaches that are helping specifically with the freshman year, because that's when it's the majority of time that students need that individualized support. So all in all, it is a robust team, and still never enough, right? With the 2,500 alums that we have. And then on the other scale is our alumni careers team. It is a team of 4 with a director, manager, and 2 associates that are doing all the work on creating externship opportunities, partnering. So if you have any internship opportunities, please send them our way. We're always happy to pair up our alums and provide them an opportunity to doing job placement and career advice as a whole.
Thank you both. So a survey was mentioned for students. There's a question around whether or not parents are surveyed, and what your goals are with regard to engaging them, and like how and when, like what's your approach to parent engagement, specifically around surveying them around this work.
No, that's a great question. We've surveyed in terms of like general approach in terms of what do parents need, what information related to Noble as a whole, but specifically to our alumni work that happens at the campus level, and ensuring that they're doing, not necessarily through surveys, but they do also, some of them will do surveys, but it's specifically having parent meetings, not only in the individual, but having parent nights at every grade level as it's appropriate to ensure families have the adequate information. I think the next steps for us, the next phase is on expanding our parent engagement. And I'll give you a specific example. One thing that I missed also on the last question was that we also have a Dreamer supports team with a Dreamer supports manager and a success coach that only works with our Dreamers. And as you heard in the introduction, like I established the program, and one of the key levers to me was parent engagement. It wasn't just the support that the student was going to get, but establishing strong partnerships with our colleges, with our communities, but especially parents. And we always did a send-off in person, that it was the student, their parents, and parents got to connect with other parents, and really spoke, to a holistic approach on supporting a student, because that is what's going to lead to success at scale. That's really hard to do with 2,800 alums, but nonetheless, we have to be creative and innovative and making sure that we're constantly engaging parents. And I would argue that the counselors that have those like strong parent connections, parent connections, family dynamic, community dynamic, are definitely finding success in the support that they're providing our alumni. Very important question, and an area of growth I hope we continue to develop.
Thanks so much for that. We have a question here about scholarship partners and Dream.us recipients. Could you talk a little bit about how Noble is supporting students with gap funding, and just anything else here that maybe we haven't gotten to discuss.
Okay, so I think there's two different layered questions, but I'll speak to the undocumented supports and then gap funding more broadly. So we've partnered this year with the Dream.us as a way to ensure that our staff had all the adequate information and resources to inform students. And then my Dreamer Supports Team group also supported the seniors to ensure they had the information ready to be able to apply for the Dream.us, right? And making sure that they're applying to schools that are undocumented friendly, right? So not only those that are in partnership with the Dream.us, but any other undocumented friendly schools. We don't have any additional gap money specifically for undocumented students beyond the Dream.us this year. However, in terms of support as a whole, we don't have a consistent way. And just like, I think that's a big, I wish, I keep, whenever I create a proposal, I'm always asking for gap money because I think that's really important and makes a difference in terms of the decision a student can make to an institution. What we have is more of a last dollar fund that helps students support through college once they enroll. And sometimes that is like, if they needed support for their enrollment fees, for transportation, to get them to that first year, that first day of their college, we do provide support. And some of our campuses have other opportunities that actually allow for those gap scholarships, but that's more at the campus level and not necessarily with all of our high schools. Great question, thank you.
So we have just one final question, and I'm trying to phrase this well. I think generally, if you could share any information you have on or thoughts that the Noble team has around the disparities that have shown up in the disaggregated data. The question is, asking about root causes. And I think the research has been pretty consistent, but if you speak to what you all understand as some of those root causes around disparities between students served, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question that, like, we would be remiss to not mention that there are some disparities across our campuses as a whole. I'm going to step back and say one big intervention that I think we've done as Noble, and not just in terms of college, but as Noble, is how we think about our funding, right? So even if we think about how funding for schools is trickled down, like, equity is not at the center of it. And what we've done different is that we created a formula, an index, to reflect which are the schools that have the highest need, right? Because their circumstances are different. Because even though it may be a smaller school, it doesn't mean that they don't need a bigger team, that we can't just distribute the funds in a way that it's, that's apples to apples, to use that metaphor again, but rather thinking about where is the highest need, what is the high equity campuses that need a different approach. So I want to say that because one of the root causes is resources, right? We are a public school district. We appreciate our partners, some of them that have joined us today, to help us do this work, because we wouldn't be able to achieve that, right, if it wasn't for that additional support. But nonetheless, as public schools, right, there is still some disparities in terms of allocation of resources, and we're trying to tackle that. We're trying to counter that to ensure that there are equitable resources across our campuses. We can't say that we live in a world that is not, that inequities exist based on race, based on class, based on gender. Those are real structural barriers for each and one of our students that we're trying to counter. So there's the broader systemic barriers that we don't have control of, but we're making an intentional decision on what our intervention will be. What is it that we're trying to change, trying to impact, and being real focused on what we can do while we have our students 4 years in each of our schools, but we continue to support them beyond that.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you all for your time and attention and questions today. And I want to thank our presenters, Dr. Aidé Acosta and J.Y. Sun. We're thrilled you could join us. Please make sure to follow @Noble Schools on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and follow A Better Chicago on Twitter @_A Better Chicago, IG and Facebook @A Better Chicago to stay in the loop with the latest. And we look forward to seeing you soon.